I'm Jan Howell, and I'm here with another fun and simple sewing tutorial showing you how to make a super cute sewing eyeglass and sunglass case. They really are quite simple to make. It only takes a little bit of fabric, and this is a great project to use up some of your fabric scraps. I'll be showing you 3 different styles. If you hang with me till the end of the video, I'm going to show you the quilt as you go method as I have used in this sunglass case. If you haven't watched my tutorial on how to make your own scrappy fabric panels, which are really cute, don't you think? I will put a link in the description below of where you can get that. Gather up your fabric, your sewing machine, and let's get started. Let's first go over the materials and items that you'll need. Of course, you'll need your sewing machine. You'll need your fabric. You can use solid pieces like this or prints, or you can use a bunch of scraps sewn together, and I'll show you how to do that. I love using a rotary cutter to cut the strips with. You can use scissors if you don't have a rotary cutter, but I really do love my rotary cutter and mat. A pair of fabric scissors. I love using these fabric clips, or you can use straight pins as well. Some kind of writing device, a pen or a pencil will work just fine. A turning stick or a point turner. A universal needle. And I like to use an 80 or 90. You will also need some kind of fabric stabilizer. I really like this, soft and stable. You could also use cotton batting or even a couple pieces of flannel. And it's always good to have on hand a seam ripper. We all make mistakes, and these work really well at helping you unpick a few stitches if you need to. And you'll need an iron and ironing board. And of course, a lot of you know that I like to put labels on my projects. Just gives it a more custom, unique touch. They're really easy to make, these labels. I will put the link in the description below where you can find the tutorial on how to make your own, or you can use any other kind of label or not put one on at all. First, I'm going to show you just using basic fabric, and then we'll go over how to use the fabric strips and this method. I'm going to use this checkered print for the outside. It's a smaller piece, 7 by 7.5 inches. The lining piece will be bigger at 7 by 9 3/4 inches. And the soft and stable stabilizer will be 7 by 7, so just a 7-inch square. If you are going to do this pieced method, of course you can make these strips as big as you want. This particular look, you'll need to cut them at least 7.5 inches by 1 inch. And I have cut a bunch of just random colors. The first thing that you'll do is take the stabilizer and measure 1 inch down, because we are going to be sewing a 1-inch seam at the top. I'm going to draw using a pen or a pencil that 1-inch seam allowance line, and I'm going to place the lining piece right side facing up, the outside piece right side facing down on top of the lining. Bring those 7-inch ends together, right side facing, and then place the stabilizer on top of that, and then you'll just clip it in place. We're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew along that line. I'm using just a regular straight stitch, and here's a little tip. To make sure that the fabric doesn't bunch up or just a smooth start, I like to use these starter fabric pieces that I keep next to my sewing machine in my little pocket there. I'll sew on that first, and then it'll smoothly sew onto the foam. And I'll do the same thing on the end. Then you can just clip those off. And there's a nice smooth start and a smooth end to your seam. So I've sewn that seam. I'm going to open up the 2 pieces. Before I flip that, I'm going to set the seam by just pressing my iron on top, and that will help stabilize that seam. Open that up as much as possible and press. Flip the lining piece over the top, line up the bottom edge, and make sure the sides are lining up, and give this edge a press. Now open everything up. It'll look like this. We'll bring the right sides together in this horizontal fold, lining up the seam of the lining and the front piece, and clip it in place. You're going to leave about a 3-inch place of the seam unsewn on the side of the lining so that we can turn it right side facing out when we're finished. I like to use a couple pins to remind me not to sew right there. And then I can use the clips if I want to. Take your fingers and just on that fold, press out the fabric lining so it's not bunched up at all. Line up the fabric and then the foam. Now, as you can see, the foam isn't as long. We do that just to make sure that there isn't a lot of bulk on there. We'll be using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is just the outside of your presser foot. It's a little bit less than a 1/2 inch, which I feel is a little too large. Got that? I'm going to take a little off of that foam. Make sure that the folds of the foam and the fabric are butt up against each other, and then clip it. I'm going to start on the lining side, sew up to the corner, down to the pin, back stitch, leave this open, back stitch, and sew down and down the bottom. When you come to the corner, leave your needle down, lift up the presser foot and pivot. It doesn't have to be exact. Take the scissors and clip off the corners, making sure you're not cutting into the seam. I forgot to put my tag in. That's what this little guy is for, this seam ripper. I am going to unpick that little section to add the tag. If you were just doing it from the start, you'll take your tag, fold it in half, and the raw edges of the tag need to be facing outward. You can do it this way, but it's easier to place it before we fold the two pieces in half and line up these edges. I would take your tag wherever you want to place it and make sure the little rabbit's facing up and place it where it needs to be. Take in consideration for the seam allowance and baste it in place first, and then I would fold my pieces over. I'm going to go baste that right now, just because I've had my tags go kind of ski-wampus while I'm trying to sew it, so I've learned just to baste it. This is a little different, and on the other one I'll show you the correct order to do this. So I'll take it to the sewing machine, baste it just barely on the edge to keep it in place, and then I will fold it over and re-sew my seam here. There's a little trick to sew that opening closed a little easier, is to fold the seam allowance up and just give it a little press so we have that edge. And then do the other side. And open that up, poke everything out. Making sure your foam pieces are laying flat. Give my outer fabric a good press, the edges open. Make sure if you have a tag that you don't get the iron on there or it will melt. Fold those edges that you pressed together and just top stitch along the edge to close it up. Take the lining, stuff it down inside your turning stick. I'll give this top edge a good press. What do you think? Pretty cute. Look at, just imagine all the fun color combinations you can use. Just a little bit of fabric. You can even put a snap on there if you want, but I have found that you don't need the snap. They stay in there pretty snug. Now let me show you how to use the quilt as you go method using little fabric strips. So I have cut a lining piece 7 by 9 3/4 inches, and we'll be sewing the strips to the foam. So first thing, the foam that we use to sew on the strips with, we're going to cut it 7.5 by 8. That just gives you a little bit of leeway when we're using all those seams. It kind of shrinks the foam and the stabilizer, and so you don't get that full 7.5. We'll cut that down to the 7 by 9 3/4 inches when we're finished. We are sewing this as you go. Sometimes, especially with this many strips of fabric, it's easy to get off course, and by the end, sometimes you're slightly off on an angle. So what I like to do is to take a pen or a pencil. That's the length, and this is the width. So what we're going to do is start with that 7.5 inch edge as the top. All right, I'm going to mark my lines just to keep it straight. Not necessarily that's where I'm going to sew. I want to have kind of an idea of where I am when I'm working, so it keeps me on course. I'll do one there, and maybe one just here. And for this size, you'll need 15. So choose a print to start with, and you can cut them off as you go. Place the edge right side up on this first piece, and then choose another color that's going to go next to it, right side facing down. I'm going to make sure those are lined up and parallel. Clip them in place. I just like to do it without clips and just do it as I sew. You're going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew down that right side. There are a couple of ways that you can sew that 1/4 inch seam. I like using my presser foot that's already on my machine. You can use a 1/4 inch presser foot if you want, or you can use your regular presser foot. And see these lines? I'm going to adjust my needle so it's not at the center, but over to that red line, and that will be my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you can see how that's moving over as I adjust that. Since there is a little bit of fabric, I won't need my starter pieces. I'm not even going to backstitch. If you want to plan this out and put them in a special order, you can line them up and then set them on your lap in the order that you want. I am just going to today be random and sew it together. So I brought my scraps to either on my leg in order or just at the side of my machine. I like to just finger press, get that open and run my finger down. Line up the edge, right side facing down on top, and sew the next strip. It's really important that as you sew that you keep that bottom piece pulled over and flat. And just continue this process till you have all your strips sewn on. Okay, so there's my strip panel. Let's go cut it down to size. We need to cut it down to that outer fabric size. See how much that shrunk down. Let's line up the bottom and get a square edge here. So you can kind of eyeball it where you want that 7.5 to be. Make sure that you're getting on that one. I kind of snuck that little piece in, but it's going to work just fine. So I'll put that on the edge, and then I'll still get that. I really like this retractable blade cutter, then I'm safe. Because sometimes when I'm in a hurry or you want to just throw that blade down, and it can be very sharp. All right, we have our panel. Now we need to add the lining. Take your lining piece, right side facing up, top piece facing down, line up the top edge, side edges, and mark your 1-inch seam allowance. I've made that seam. I need to press that open. Fold it over, line up the bottom edges. Looking good. Now we're going to open that up again. Grab your tag if you want to add one. I'm going to decide where I want to put that and then baste it in place. And it really is worth that extra effort to do that. Fold it over lengthwise, line up the binding edges, clip it in place. I'm going to set up my no-sew zone with my pins, reminding me not to sew between those points. Start at this folded edge, sew down, back stitch, sew down, and to the corner. Make sure that that is open and flat. My starter scrap piece. Super cute, don't you think? Another cute eyeglass case. These make such fun gifts. They are quick and fun to make up. I think once you make one, you'll be addicted and you'll be making sunglass cases for everyone. You can do the same thing with your Scrappy fabric panels. Find my tutorial on how to do that. Really easy to do. Just cut a piece the size that you need for that front panel, and look what you can come up with. The color combinations, the scraps of fabric choices are endless. What a great way to use up your fabric scraps. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you are one that likes to have a printed copy of the pattern and instructions, I'll put the link in the description where you can locate that on my website, where I have other fun patterns and projects for you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like and click on the bell for notifications so I can let you know when I put new things up. Have a wonderful day, have fun sewing, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.